If someone had claimed in the late 1980s that tiny Monaco would attempt to build its own supercar with a carbon fiber monocoque, a Lamborghini V12 engine, and ambitions of humiliating the Ferrari F40, it would have sounded like a joke told over drinks in a Monte Carlo casino. And yet the MCA Centenaire was real. It was a car so ambitious that even today, it is hard to believe it was not created by a major automotive corporation, but by a small company from a principality better known for Formula One, luxury yachts, roulette tables, and billionaires than for automobile manufacturing. The Centenaire was meant to be more than just another exotic coupe. It was intended to become Monaco's first supercar, a technological showcase for Monte Carlo automobiles, and a tribute to the 100th anniversary of the Automobile Club de Monaco. In practice, it became a mixture of Italian passion, Monegasque prestige, Formula One technology, and an engine sourced from one of the wildest manufacturers in automotive history. On paper, it looked like the perfect recipe for a legend. A mid-mounted Lamborghini V12, carbon fiber, Kevlar, styling straight from the golden age of analog supercars, and a planned production run of 100 examples. The problem was that the Centenaire arrived at exactly the wrong moment. The exotic car market was beginning to collapse, production costs were enormous, and the brand lacked the recognition of Ferrari, Lamborghini, or Bugatti. That is why today, the MCA Centenaire remains one of the most mysterious, forgotten, and underrated supercars of the late 1980s and early 1990s. The project was created by Fulvio Maria Bellabio, an Italian racing driver and Monaco resident, who possessed enough ambition to attempt something most people would never even dare to imagine. Bellabio competed in Formula Ford, Formula 3, Formula 2, Formula 3000, endurance racing, Le Mans events, and even explored American kart racing as well as offshore powerboat competition. He was not a random businessman dreaming about a flashy exotic car. He was a motorsport man who understood speed, danger, and technical superiority. In 1983, he founded Monte Carlo Automobiles, and several years later, he began executing his vision of creating a supercar worthy of Monaco itself. The idea was symbolic. If the Principality had hosted one of the world's most famous Formula One Grand Prix for decades and had become synonymous with automotive glamour, then it deserved its own car manufacturer. The project gained additional meaning when it became tied to the 100th anniversary of the Automobile Club de Monaco, founded in 1890. That is where the name Centenaire, meaning centenary, originated. The official presentation before Prince Rainier III was meant to demonstrate that this was not some amateur garage fantasy, but a national prestige project. Monte Carlo Automobiles intended to build a machine capable of proving that even the world's smallest principality could create a supercar able to compete with the greatest automotive icons on Earth. Bellabio knew, however, that ambition alone would not be enough. To create a real supercar, he needed world-class engineers and designers. That is why the project attracted specialists connected to Formula One, sports prototypes, and the Italian engineering elite. The most important technical figure was Carlo Citti, a man with an extraordinary resume. Citti had previously worked for Ferrari before founding Autodelta, Alfa Romeo's legendary racing division. He was responsible for many of Alfa Romeo's most famous competition projects, including the Alfa Romeo 33 prototypes, the GTA models, and numerous racing engine programs. His experience covered everything a radical car like the Centenaire required: engines, aerodynamics, structural engineering, and real motorsport expertise. Alongside him was Guglielmo Bellassi, a constructor involved in racing, and one of the early pioneers experimenting with composite materials. Other names associated with the project included figures linked to Alfa Romeo and Italian motorsport circles, such as Pierluigi Corbari. This is important because the MCA Centenaire was not developed according to the typical blueprint of a small exotic manufacturer buying an engine, building a tubular frame, and covering it with dramatic bodywork. From the beginning, the car was conceived as a genuine technological showcase. Bellabio wanted his creation not only to look fast, but to be truly advanced beneath the surface. That is exactly why the project stood apart from many other obscure supercars of the era. The greatest breakthrough of the MCA Centenaire was its structure. The car used a carbon fiber and Kevlar monocoque with a honeycomb core design. Today this sounds completely normal in the world of hypercars, but in the late 1980s, such technology was almost science fiction. At the time, carbon fiber was associated primarily with Formula One and highly advanced racing prototypes. The Ferrari F40 used composite materials, but did not feature a full carbon monocoque. The McLaren F1, commonly regarded as a revolutionary step in this area, would not arrive until years later. In that sense, the Centenaire was dramatically ahead of its time, in a way the wider public never fully appreciated. Developing this structure reportedly took around 5 years because it needed to be lightweight, rigid, safe, and capable of handling the tremendous forces produced by the centrally mounted V12 engine. This was not a simple frame with a pretty body attached to it. It was a serious attempt to transfer Formula One technology directly onto public roads. As a result, the MCA Centenaire possessed an extraordinarily modern design, even if the company itself lacked the marketing power to convince the world that it had created something revolutionary. Many modern sources describe the Centenaire as one of the first, and according to some accounts, the very first, road-going supercars built around such an advanced carbon composite monocoque structure. The second crucial element was the engine. Bellabio did not have the resources to design an all-new power plant from scratch, so he needed a supplier capable of delivering both prestige and performance. He managed to achieve something very unusual, securing an agreement with Lamborghini. At the time, Lamborghini was not known for freely supplying its engines to outside manufacturers. Nevertheless, MCA received permission to use the 5-liter V12 from the Countach. That fact alone is enough to make the Centenaire fascinating. A Lamborghini V12 inside a Monaco-built supercar engineered by people with Ferrari and Alfa Romeo backgrounds sounds almost too extraordinary to be real. In standard form, the V12 produced approximately 455 horsepower, which was already serious supercar territory at the time. But Bellabio believed that was insufficient. The Centenaire was meant to stand above the competition rather than merely join it. Carlo Chiti and his engineers therefore began working on more extreme versions of the engine. The most famous specification involved twin turbochargers, one for each cylinder bank, boosting output to around 720 horsepower and, according to some reports, even more. In the late 1980s, such numbers were absolutely staggering. That placed the MCA above cars like the Ferrari F40, Porsche 959, Lamborghini Diablo, and most road-going supercars of the era. The technical specifications of the MCA Centenaire vary from source to source because the car was produced in extremely small numbers, and individual examples differed in configuration. Most descriptions state that the Lamborghini-powered version used a 5-liter mid-mounted V12 engine driving the rear wheels. The naturally aspirated version produced around 455 horsepower, while the most radical GTB twin-turbo variant reached approximately 720 horsepower. Power was delivered through a manual transmission, generally described as a 5-speed gearbox. The claimed top speed was incredibly ambitious, supposedly reaching 350 kilometers per hour, although more realistic estimates place the true figure closer to 305 kilometers per hour, depending on the version. Acceleration from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour was said to take roughly 4.5 seconds. It is important to remember that MCA was not a giant automotive corporation, so its official figures were not always verified in the same way as those of Ferrari or Porsche. Even so, the specifications reveal the scale of the company's ambition. The car combined a lightweight composite structure, a mid-mounted V12 engine, a manual gearbox, rear-wheel drive, and an extremely low aerodynamic profile. Those were precisely the characteristics that defined the purest supercars of the late 1980s and early 1990s. The difference was that MCA attempted to merge cutting-edge racing technology with near-hand-built craftsmanship, making the project both incredibly impressive and enormously difficult to sustain financially. The Centenaire's suspension also demonstrated that the engineers were not treating the car as a mere showpiece. The vehicle used Formula One-inspired solutions, including a pushrod suspension setup with wishbones and anti-roll bars. Such a design helped reduce unsprung weight, improve wheel control, and maintain a very low body profile. In a road car, this kind of sophisticated suspension was extremely rare at the time, especially for a small manufacturer. The Centenaire was meant to be fast, not only in a straight line, but also through corners. The centrally mounted engine contributed to ideal weight distribution, while the rigid carbon monocoque provided a stable platform for precise handling. The car was engineered with race car performance in mind, rather than everyday usability. At the same time, it was not a stripped-out racing machine devoid of comfort. The cabin featured leather upholstery, bucket seats, and air conditioning, because the intended buyers were wealthy clients accustomed to luxury. This blend was characteristic of the era. A supercar needed to feel brutal while still smelling of leather and exclusivity. The MCA Centenaire therefore attempted to combine two worlds, Formula One technology and the atmosphere of an elite grand tourer designed for millionaires living in Monte Carlo. It was an extraordinarily difficult balancing act, especially for a small company without major manufacturing resources. Stylistically, the MCA Centenaire was very much a product of its time, yet it never looked like a direct copy of any particular rival. In profile, it inevitably evoked Lamborghini due to its low silhouette, wedge-shaped nose, and mid-engine layout. However, its lines were smoother and more fluid than those of the Countach, while the rear wing and broad stance recalled the aesthetic of cars like the Ferrari F40, Venturi supercars, and endurance racing prototypes. The front end sat extremely low to the ground, almost like the nose of a missile, helping aerodynamic efficiency while giving the car an aggressive visual presence. The body was long, wide, and exceptionally low, making it appear more like a concept car than something intended for public roads. That was part of its appeal. The Centenaire was not designed to be an elegant Aston Martin-style coupe. It was meant to be a technological manifesto from a tiny company determined to enter the supercar elite. Some descriptions even mention the name Castagna, linked to the Italian coach-building tradition. That detail reinforces the fact that the Centenaire was not merely an engineering exercise, but also a cultural and stylistic statement. It was supposed to represent Monaco itself: glamour, spectacle, luxury, and ambition. Even today, the MCA Centenaire looks unusual and futuristic. It is not as instantly recognizable as the Ferrari F40 or Bugatti EB110, but that very obscurity adds to its fascination. Most people first ask, "What is this?" before discovering the extraordinary story behind it. The official launch of the car was deeply connected to the centenary celebration of the Automobile Club de Monaco. The first prototypes were presented to Prince Rainier III in 1990, exactly as Bellabio had planned. It was the moment when Monte Carlo automobiles could proudly declare that Monaco now possessed its own supercar. The company initially intended to build 100 examples, matching the symbolic meaning of the name, Centenaire. In reality, that goal proved impossible. The early 1990s brought a severe recession and the collapse of the speculative exotic car market. During the 1980s, supercars were often purchased as investments, with prices rising to absurd levels. Then the bubble burst. Buyers became more cautious, and small manufacturers without established reputations suffered the most. The Centenaire was extremely expensive, technologically complicated, and required buyers to trust a company with no dealer network or proven service infrastructure. As a result, instead of 100 units, only a handful of original cars were produced. Most historical accounts mention just 5 examples built between 1990 and 1992, although later developments such as the GTB, Beau Rivage, MiG, and Mega Monte Carlo versions create confusion in production numbers. The figure of 5 original Centenaires remains the most widely accepted estimate. That extreme rarity is one of the reasons why the car has become so intriguing to collectors today. Among the surviving cars, the Beau Rivage version occupies a particularly special place. This was an open-roof derivative, often described as a Targa or Roadster, named after the famous Beau Rivage Hotel in Monte Carlo. It was intended to represent an even more exclusive and luxurious interpretation of the Centenaire concept, showing that the platform could evolve beyond a hardcore coupe into something more glamorous. According to available information, only one Beau Rivage was ever built, usually associated with blue paintwork and the absence of the standard rear wing. Details like these illustrate how fluid and improvised the Centenaire project really was. MCA did not operate like a major manufacturer with a rigid catalog of variants and organized production lines. Every car was effectively a unique project. Some examples used engines closer to standard Lamborghini specification, while others received extensive modifications. Certain cars later became the basis for racing developments, or entirely new versions under different names. In that sense, the Centenaire resembled classic coach-built exotics more than a traditional production supercar. For collectors, this complicated and fragmented history often increases the car's appeal. Vehicles with mysterious origins and unusual development stories tend to become fascinating historical artifacts. The MCA Centenaire is exactly that. Part supercar, part prototype, part national symbol of Monaco, and part Formula One-inspired engineering experiment. The story of the Centenaire did not end with the original road cars. In 1993, the project entered a new phase when it was acquired by Georgian businessman Alexander Mingriglia, leading to the creation of the MiG M100, also known as the MiG Taco M100. The name MiG reportedly referred to Mingriglia and Georgia, although numerous legends later surrounded the project, including rumors involving former Soviet aerospace facilities producing carbon fiber components. The most ambitious goal was to race the car at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. From a marketing perspective, the idea made perfect sense. If the Centenaire already possessed racing-derived technology, a carbon monocoque, and a mid-mounted V12, Le Mans could provide the legitimacy the brand desperately lacked. Unfortunately, the project was unsuccessful. The MiG M100 appeared at tests and qualifying sessions, but failed to make the grid. The team lacked the money, preparation, and infrastructure necessary to compete against established endurance racing operations. Even so, the mere attempt added another extraordinary chapter to the Centenaire's history. Very few supercars have followed such a bizarre trajectory, from a Monaco centenary celebration to a Lamborghini-powered carbon fiber exotic, and finally to a Georgian Le Mans project. Today, the MiG M100 is almost forgotten, but among enthusiasts of obscure supercars, it remains one of the strangest stories of the 1990s. It demonstrated that the Centenaire possessed genuine potential. The problem was never imagination. The problem was resources. The next chapter came when the project was taken over by Aixam Mega during the mid-1990s. The French company, better known for small city cars and microcars, attempted to use the Centenaire platform as the basis for a new supercar called the Mega Monte Carlo. The car was displayed at the 1996 Geneva Motor Show and represented a heavily revised evolution of the original concept. Instead of the Lamborghini V12, it used a Mercedes-Benz V12 engine already employed in other mega projects. The bodywork was updated, the design modernized, and the company attempted once again to enter the supercar market. Once again, however, success failed to materialize. production remained extremely limited, homologation difficulties persisted, and competition in the mid-1990s had become fierce. Cars such as the Bugatti EB110, McLaren F1, Ferrari F50, and Jaguar XJ220 defined an era in which small manufacturers required enormous financial backing simply to survive. The Mega Monte Carlo was interesting, but it lacked the resources and visibility needed to compete seriously. Even so, its existence demonstrates how advanced the original Centenaire concept really was. A platform conceived in the late 1980s still seemed promising enough to revive years later. Depending on the source, the total number of MCA mega derivatives varies considerably, but the original Centenaire remains extraordinarily rare. That ambiguity is part of its legend. It is not a car easily summarized in a production chart. It was a constantly evolving project that changed owners, names, engines, and ambitions. In terms of performance and positioning, the MCA Centenaire was an astonishingly ambitious machine. In naturally aspirated form, with around 455 horsepower, it could already compete with the major supercars of its era. But the 700-plus horsepower turbocharged variants transformed it into something genuinely monstrous. For comparison, the Ferrari F40 produced 478 horsepower, the early Lamborghini Diablo around 492 horsepower, and the Porsche 959 approximately 450 horsepower. If the GTB version truly delivered around 720 horsepower, then the MCA was among the most powerful road cars of its time. The claimed top speed of 350 kilometers per hour sounded like a direct challenge to the entire supercar establishment. Whether the car consistently achieved such figures in reality is debatable, but even more conservative estimates around 300 kilometers per hour were highly impressive. More important than the numbers themselves was the philosophy behind the car. The Centenaire embodied the excess and fearlessness of late 1980s supercar culture. More power, more technology, more exotic materials, and fewer compromises. There were no hybrid systems, no advanced driver aids, and no electronic filters. Instead, there was a massive V12 engine, a manual gearbox, a lightweight carbon structure, and enormous engineering ambition. That is precisely what makes the Centenaire so fascinating today. Even if it never became a mainstream icon, it possessed every ingredient required to become a legend. What it lacked was timing, financial stability, and luck. The modern value of the MCA Centenaire is extremely difficult to define because the cars almost never appear publicly, and actual sales are exceptionally rare. The value depends heavily on the specific example, its history, engine specification, originality, and documentation. In recent years, some reports have mentioned asking prices around €1 million or $1 million. On 2025, listing reportedly offered a car for approximately €1 million, while another source from 2024 referenced a figure close to $997,000. These estimates suggest that the market has begun treating the Centenaire as a seven-figure collector's item, although asking prices do not necessarily reflect final transaction values. If a properly documented Lamborghini-powered example in original condition appeared at auction today, its realistic value could probably range between €800,000 and €1.3 million. Exceptional versions such as the GTB, Beau Rivage, or historically important prototypes could potentially command even more, especially among collectors seeking something truly obscure and unique. At the same time, the Centenaire lacks the widespread recognition of icons like the Ferrari F40 or Bugatti EB110, meaning its collector market remains relatively small and specialized. This is a car for enthusiasts who value pioneering carbon fiber engineering, Monaco heritage, Lamborghini V12 power, and extreme rarity more than mainstream prestige. That is also why its value may continue to rise over time, especially as collectors increasingly seek analog supercars with unusual histories and uncompromising engineering. The MCA Centenaire remains one of the most extraordinary supercars of its era because it combined everything that made late 1980s automotive culture so exciting. The dream of a tiny manufacturer, Formula One technology, a Lamborghini V12 engine, a carbon fiber monocoque, a manual gearbox, and ambitions of defeating the world's greatest supercars. It was not a commercial success, but it is difficult to call it an engineering failure. This was a car built more from courage than from financial logic. 100 examples were planned, but only a handful of original Centenaires were completed before the project evolved into the Beau Rivage, MiG M100, and Mega Monte Carlo. That fragmented and unpredictable history is precisely what makes the car so captivating. The MCA Centenaire never became a poster car legend like the Ferrari F40 or McLaren F1, but it was one of those machines that demonstrated how far motorsport dreamers were willing to go. Had the company enjoyed greater funding, better market timing, and a stronger sales network, perhaps the Centenaire would today be discussed alongside the EB1, W40, and McLaren F1 as one of the defining supercars of its generation. Instead, it remains a mysterious Monaco-built legend, known mostly to hardcore enthusiasts of rare exotics. And perhaps that is exactly why it is so fascinating. This is not another obvious collector's icon with a famous badge on the hood. It is proof that even the smallest principality in the world could produce a machine ambitious enough to challenge the automotive elite. The MCA Centenaire was a supercar built more from passion and audacity than from corporate calculation, and cars like that tend to become the most interesting legends of all.